My name is Colden Baxter, and I'm a professor at Idaho State University. I'm principally an ecologist of streams and rivers, and um, I, but I also study the linkages between water and land, and in recent years have taken to doing work that links the social sciences and ecological sciences and better to better understand the relationships between people and rivers. And I got started working back here at the at Taylor Ranch, or this field station. I actually came here. I kind of like this story because it is a little emblematic. Before I even moved into my office at Idaho State University, my predecessor Wayne Minshall and I, within days of my arrival at ISU, came back in here and made a visit. And it was like November, but I was so excited about the prospect of getting to know this place and beginning to do science here and connect what I was thinking about doing to what he had done for decades back here in the Middle Fork Salmon River country, and specifically here out of Taylor Ranch. And big part of my enthusiasm for that job and my excitement at getting that opportunity had to do with this place and the prospect of making that connection. And that was the fall, well, of 2004. And so I've been coming back in here regularly ever since then, not only for to carry on the long-term monitoring that Doc Minshall and his students began in the late 1980s, but also to collaborate with and work with a whole array of undergraduate and graduate students who've used this as a base for doing various research projects. And so for me, the continuity of the long-term monitoring and consistently having students work in here has meant that this place and the surrounding river drainage has become a real home space for me and for my community, both my family and the community of people that I work with. And ecology is the science of home. Like, that's actually what the word originally means, right? And so I think of places like this as particularly meaningful contexts for doing ecological research, because I've come to think of it as a home place. And so and so the science we do here and the culture, the community of people that it interacts here is rich and deep, and it extends back before my having even visited this place. So that's a little bit of the backdrop, I guess, for why this place is how I'm connected to this place and why it's special to me and to my family.
You're pursuing a study of home in a place that has become a home.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed while observing your students today that scientific production for you is both um, it's also a family fair as much as it is a scientific one. And there's this interesting overlap between personal and professional worlds that is not often there in science. And I was wondering while watching you guys, like, maybe this is good for science actually. Maybe the data is enriched because there's this deep personal connection to the place where it's being understood or collected.
Yeah, I think so. I have learned a lot from so Doc Minshall, who just passed away a couple years ago, became an important mentor to me and friend, um, and especially in this place, the sort of multi-generational potential for our community of scientists was realized. But also, he was someone who always involved his family in the science that he did, and that resonated with me as well. And so I began by bringing my family along and work that we were doing here. In a field station context in general, I think lend themselves to that sort of uh, um, kind of familial and home connection to place, which is often lost or at least is not realized uh, in other contexts, and that's part of what makes them special. That's definitely true of this place, and I do think that is the science of ecology, and natural sciences in many respects I feel like are still very much maturing, evolving and maturing. Ecology is still kind of a young science, but one of its real potential, I think, lies in the possibility of its becoming a place and community rooted science, and that is that connects and investigates connections between people and landscapes. And so I don't know, this is a complicated place to do that, because it's wilderness, which is meant to be a place where people are excluded, right? And you go to be away from the influences of people, and yet the place is it's a place that we connect to deeply as a community. And so I I don't know. I work closely with partners with the tribes in Idaho, particularly the Shoshone-Bannock tribes. And over the years, I've also learned from my partners there and my collaborators that this sort of vision of ecology, for a variety of reasons, resonates more with them as well. And I respect and appreciate their perspectives on that, and I think there's a lot to learn from that. Ecology actually has a lot to learn from thinking about and casting the work that we do in that sort of context that doesn't separate. We don't separate ourselves from the place that we're working to understand. Right?
Morris Hornacher, when I interviewed him, said that a good scientist should feel, or a good field scientist should feel their object, and what you're saying makes me think that, in a sense, it's difficult to apply the human sensory apparatus to, like, remote sensing data, for example. It's hard to personally connect to it. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, this is a landscape or a riverscape, as you've called it, that you've gotten to know very intimately over time, parallel to this long-term data set that you've produced. And so I feel like it allows you to feel the data in a way that adds actually rigor, scientific rigor, to the set.
Sure.
Do you think that's true?
Sure, yeah, and having spent a lot of time, like, with my head stuck under cut banks and that kind of thing, or behind boulders in Big Creek, and watching fish in the middle of the night, and all of these years of close observation mean that, like, for example, a remote sensing data set may still actually be really valuable, but it's often the case that I can because of this experience and these connections and intimate knowledge of the place, I can look at a different data set like that, and I'll see or notice things that maybe other people wouldn't. The opposite is true too. Sometimes people who are strangers to a place will notice things that folks who've been there for a really long time haven't. And that's one reason I really value, of course, bringing students here. Students see and ask questions about things that I might not have ever really even considered, right? So I love that sort of constant introduction of new people to this situation. It's not just like my family comes in here every year and we all do exactly the same thing. There is that core like that rope of tradition, but it's always like the cast of characters is shifting. That what people are paying attention to and asking questions about is shifting, and that's healthy for the science, of course.
What do you think your undergraduate students take away from these experiences of just bushwhacking along cut banks and all this stuff?
Yeah,
They seem, observing them, they seem really happy and content to hike in here and then to do this difficult work.
yeah. Well, definitely, for some of them, it's some of them have a lot of outdoor experience already, and they are learning then to become field scientists, really, which to be a field scientist involves being cultivating a kind of comfort in in oftentimes harsh and conditions, so that you can focus on the science, not on just on your own personal comfort or like your next meal or whatever, or your gear or equipment or whatever it might be, right? But you have to develop an ease with being in the backcountry, for instance. And some of them they're all at different stages in that, and but for some, this is the first time that they've ever walked that far, for example, and that sometimes that rocks their world. But sometimes that's kind of can be a little rough, but it's generally, yeah, I mean, it's a life altering experience, changes people's perspectives, and changes the way they might think about themselves and their own potential in some cases. I had one of my first graduate students work in here, and we developed a pretty ambitious project. By the end of her project, we estimated that she'd walk the equivalent of from here to the ocean and back to the Pacific. And I was like, uh, that was really impressive for in on all counts, right? But I know that for her, that became a part of her identity, and the sort of her ability to approach all kinds of other challenges that she experienced in her life in the years since then, and so that's a roundabout answer to your question, but that is to say, there are all kinds of different. Every student's different in terms of their experience of this place, and the undergraduate students are usually only here for short periods of time, whereas the graduate students get a deeper dive, usually in terms of their experience of the landscape. And nonetheless, it also sets a kind of frame of reference for them. Many of them will go on to be natural resource scientists and managers, and to have spent time in wilderness in and along a wild river affects your frame of reference. It's a frame of reference that's vanishing, and without that, uh, you know, I, it concerns me that we might that natural resource managers might lack that perspective. So, but it's also a really rich social experience, right? This is probably what you have to do these days to have a group of people put away their phones for a while and interact, like really interact with one another, pay attention to their surroundings, really interact with one another. They tend to really to connect with one another and with the place, and that becomes a kind of lesson in itself, right? About how to make that happen elsewhere, places other than Taylor Ranch and the wilderness. But at least I like to think so. I know it's been that way for my daughters. So
It's funny or it's ironic that one of the few places where this can occur in our modern world is a place in which we've defined it by excluding ourselves.
yeah, that's what I was alluding to that earlier. It is that's strange, and like I mentioned my collaborations with tribal partners, and I feel like honestly our vision of and the way that we think about wilderness is something that is still maturing and changing, and as is our relationship with nature in general. I'd like to think that it has that it will kind of continue to mature. Yeah, right. Yeah, and big important steps along those lines include, you know, seeing, cultivating relationships between yourself and places like this, and not just like experiencing them as a playground, a recreational kind of playground, or as some kind of like purely utilitarian um, um, thing either. Right?
But yeah, a place full of non-human others.
Yeah, and that in a place that where you can and should be thinking about sort of reciprocal relationships, right? And those are idealistic, I suppose, perspectives, but certainly some of my hope, anyway, for this sort of thing. The context lends itself to thought, too. People spending time thinking, and including myself, right? So, like, time to actually, think.
I know you're probably getting hungry, but maybe just one or two more.
Sure, yeah.
What would you like to see for Taylor's future?
Well, first of all, I hope that it will continue to be a field station, and because there have been times in the past where I was worried that it would not, that it wouldn't continue, and that I'm really pleased that the University of Idaho seems to clearly value the place now, and I guess what I would like to see for its future is that people who are responsible for its management and decision making associated with it, consider carefully what its actual strengths and real areas of potential are, because there's always there's a little bit of a tendency to imagine that a place could be turned into something that it's not, or that it's never been. And this place has gone through several iterations of that kind of, quote, visioning that wasn't really very well informed, frankly, from my perspective, by its history or lived experience here. Lived experience here can be used to inform the planning and goals and strategies. And I think I'm a little bit biased along these lines, but I really think that there's a lot to be learned from the model that I was describing, of sort of building this rope of tradition and history, but also always having new people coming and going, right? And but so help, and that is part of its tradition, is that there, from its beginnings as a science outpost, it has it's focused on work that especially could only really be done in this sort of context, and has explored this combination. Well, hello, this combination of oh of long-term monitoring, and then creative short-term studies superimposed on that. I don't think it's a great place to try to make into what it's not. I remember a visioning a time at one point where it was like, what we really need is to get some really smart scientists here from Princeton and other people who are really high-powered researchers, right? So there was that phase, and then there was the phase of and that didn't pan out. It was and during that time, it was kind of, frankly, it was for Doc and myself and others, it was what are we, chopped liver? I mean, so to speak. But and then there was another phase, was what we really need to do is have this be this wilderness classroom that we bring people from all over the world here, and especially really wealthy East Coaster, frankly, right? And some of that, there are elements to each of those that maybe could work out here, but those things have come and gone, right? And with varying levels of success. They're not really a sustainable model for this place, and neither one of them actually is my perspective. It's not a place to host really large numbers of people. It's a place to sustain rich experiences for individuals and small groups of people, doing science and also providing context for interaction. And with respect to the latter, although I appreciate the modern amenities of the place, I think we've probably gone about as far as we should along those lines. I prefer, in general, when I have my students back here, we keep busy and we don't spend a bunch of time. I don't like going into the lab and finding the whole group of students watching Netflix or something like that. That's not what we're here for. If the internet needs to be used, should be for things like important communications and so on. And just because you're here for a longer period of time doesn't mean that you should suddenly switch over to a lifestyle that importing the lifestyle of that kind of thing. I don't know. That seems to sort of cheapen the experience a little bit. But I'm a little bit of a Luddite when it comes to that kind of thing too. So
Well, based on what you've been saying, it feels like a place that's perfectly situated for the contemplation of the very small scale and the larger scale,
Mm.
the geological,
Yeah,
you know,
it is.
as well as.
But you got to get out in it too. I mean, I've noticed some patterns here in the last. I mean, when I first started working in here, it was a lot more common for students to really be, like a fairly decent number of students to be out every day covering territory, right? And then for a whole period of time, the pattern was kind of the exact opposite. People would come back in here and hang out, but the trails looked like nobody had even been on them, right? And I was like, what are you doing watching Netflix? Get out there, get out into this landscape, and um, this is a base from which to experience the wilderness. It's not in and of itself the wilderness. So, yeah, that's a little bit of critique commentary, I guess.
That's fine.
I
That's fine.
yeah.
You'll be happy to know that Grace Pevin kicked my ass when we checked on these springs. That was probably a 5 mile bushwhack,
Uh-huh.
maybe 1,500
Yeah,
in
yeah.
elevation. You know.
That's more the style of. I mean, this place. I'm not saying that's the only kind of person that can can should be here or that thrives here, but
We
I
need to
mean, we
facilitate that
need
kind
to
of person.
facilitate that kind of thing because that is a whole skill set and a set of abilities that is underdeveloped and becoming more rare, right? And so Taylor has a unique. I mean, if it's Taylor Wilderness Research Station, part of what you're training are people who have what it takes to conduct work in fairly challenging environments like this. And, I think that's still something that the world and science needs are people with those skills and abilities. So I'm glad to hear it and to see that that's still being nurtured.
And then lastly, you often mention Dr. Wayne Minshaw, Doc, as you call him. Can you just talk about the importance of his work to you and his work to this place?
Yeah, I can. So Doc was one of the world's leading um, experts on the ecology of streams and rivers, and uh, he he could his career could have taken any number of different directions, but in the late 1970s, early 1980s, he really sort of discovered doing field science in the Middle Fork Salmon River country, and he got hooked on it himself, and it became a part of his and his family's lifestyle, and and it became a home place for him then, and so much so that he not only did sort of traditional stream ecological research, but then when he retired, he turned to focusing on what had been sort of a hobby for him in the years prior to that, investigations into the history, human history, recent human history of the drainage, and which he wrote up and self-published a couple of books on the topic. And so I bring that up because the ecological work that he did in here and his students did in here was informed by the this continuity and like year after year coming in here and the deep knowledge of the landscape, its geography, and like, oh, this stream, I remember, you know 3 years ago, this log was not here, it was over there, right? And you could, you had a, we might have the data for that, but it would also be in your memory and in your mind, and that, and that, like I say, that experience, that lived experience of these places, is part of what then not only made the science he was doing excellent, uh, but it contributed to the sort of there was also this group culture community thing. I mean, when he passed away, his students came from all over the country to a memorial that we had, and almost every one of them told stories, especially of their times, whether their thesis research was done back in here or not. Almost all of them had stories to tell of their relationships with him and with one another that came from their time coming in here every summer to help with the long-term monitoring work. And I think that says something that, those were really, those were influential experiences, powerful, rich experiences for them, as they've continued to be for my students and my family. And so, yeah, the science that he did, just a little bit of commentary on that. Ow, cat. Tell you what, okay, I really got a little claw. Just a little bit of claw. um, um, so I think some of the really important science that Doc and his students did in here and elsewhere, like Yellowstone, too, but have been key to contributing to a change in the way that scientists and society views the natural dynamics of the environment and, nature's dynamics in general, and wildfire is a classic example of that, something that we imagine and experience as a kind of catastrophe, and it certainly has those elements to it. This place is absolutely, it's a great example of it, right? But ecologically, the lesson of studying wildfire in this place overall has been that wildfire and dynamics like landslides and debris flows and in a big, complex, connected, free-flowing river network like this is something that it's a good thing. It's a part of the home. It's a characteristic of the home, right? And not like, so his work helped us see that, like, a static condition for nature was not a static, and a neat kind of park-like condition for nature is not actually the way things work, right? Nature, like a healthy stream and river, is a messy one, and one that is changing and dynamic all the time, right? And his science helped contribute to that sort of, maturing ecological perspective. And I learned from him and others of his generation that those types of lessons, and continue to try to use this context to learn more about that dynamism itself, essentially.
Doc also seemed to have pioneered this ethic or method where you know when a chair's been moved in your home.
Yeah, that log used to be there. Now it's over there, or it's gone. Or, this boulder, was only, you could only just see the top of it. And now look at it. You can see the whole thing, right? But it took a decade for that to happen or whatever. And so, yeah, paying close attention to things of that sort, and gathering data so as to essentially be in a position to notice when that happens. That's not the long view is not, even ecologists have not necessarily, taken the long view, even though their science, the science of ecology, really at its heart and it's the spirit of it really ought to inspire that. Even ecologists haven't really taken the long, what I describe as the long view, and he did, and then he was really enthusiastic about the idea that together we were actually getting a longer view, right? That instead of one professor retiring and then a new professor moving in and just building everything new from scratch, that we were going to share our lived experiences, that there was going to be this translation of background experience and culture, right?
And shifting paradigms.
And yeah, and that then to me, I know of a handful of circumstances like that have occurred around the world in the science of ecology, but I think that's one of its real potential. There's a potential that is somewhat untapped. Like, how do you actually turn ecology into a multi-generational effort, right? And I hope a place like this, if it's really dedicated to this in the long haul, right, in the long, and has the long view, it has the potential to be the kind of place that nurtures that, right? And like to see more of that. Like Jim Peake's long-term monitoring as well, and others, other repeating studies that students did 30, 40 years ago, that kind of thing. There's a lot of potential for that here. Yeah, so I hope to see more of that kind of thing, and I feel privileged to have been introduced to the place by Doc, and then and Jim and Holly Atkinson, who were just also really inspiring people to interact with in my in the first years that I was working back here, and they really sort of fueled my enthusiasm for this sort of thing. So I really appreciate that, and appreciate the opportunity to keep coming back here every year.